Well, thanks, everybody. I realize I'm the last person standing between you and happy hour, so I will make my comments short. I just wanted to thank everybody. I know it's tough to hang in until this time of day when we start early, but the majority of our audience is still with us, so I think that's a good sign. I think we're all really interested in this topic. I did want to thank our our moderators today and highlight some points that hit me and hit them in particular. In terms of our current lab systems panel, I was struck by how much is being done right now. I think because of COVID, there's been this tendency to be really super negative and super critical and, wring our hands about how little has been done or how much more needs to be done or how much we couldn't get done. But to hear some of the data, more than a million tests that were done, for example, for COVID and so forth, I think we have to do a better job of tooting our own horns, as it were, and to let people know. I thank you to the Academies for providing this forum for that. But I would say ATCC should not have to stand up at the forum to tell people what it is that they're doing. Yeah, well, but there's a lot good that's going on, and I think we need to do a better job of making sure everybody knows that. It's clear that we need to pre-position and predetermine and pre-contract and redefine what it means to prepare. I think that word preparedness has gotten to be so vague now that we're not even sure whether we are prepared. We're not sure what to do to be prepared. I think we have to go back and sort of figure that out again based on some of the lessons learned that we discussed today. I also think that I know we were talking about current lab systems for that first panel, but it was clear to me that there are some things that have occurred and are occurring right now that we could be looking at and making determinations, predictions on what's going to happen in the future. That we could be doing that, but we would have to actually have a dedicated activity to do that. I know it's hard. It's hard in the laboratory systems. It's hard when you have ongoing emergencies and you're testing around the clock and you're trying not to burn everybody out, but we have to do it. Somebody put up a slide earlier of one of Stephen Covey's books, and one of the things that he says is that you're never going to break out of the cycle and just focusing on what you have to do today if you never, ever spare the time to address what we need to do in the future. So we're going to have to do it. And I suggest that when we're trying to get funding for people and things, that's something we should be trying to get funding for. For our second panel, and I want to thank Lee Fleischer for moderating that. The second panel on understanding past and current performance. Kenra, thank you for moderating. There she is, thank you. I think there are clearly some already identified needs. Scott put up a slide about regulatory and guidance and tests and supply chains and data and workforce. But I think that we need to rethink the concept of surge and what pre-existing capacity actually means. We had a few examples today. You can say that, oh, gee, we needed swabs. We need it. We have this horrible, incredible, terrible need. But once you expand your notion of who can help you, suddenly it's not that we didn't need it, but that need suddenly decreases because somebody else can provide it. We just had to alter what counted or who counted as somebody who could be a supplier. And I think we need to start thinking that way now, before the next thing happens, or while current things are happening, I suppose. Personally, I have to tell you, anything, any entity, any title with the letter R in it that's supposed to stand for response, either actually should have to respond or should no longer have the letter R in their title, because frankly, I think there are expectations that are associated with that, and if you're supposed to be a response entity and you can't, then how's that fair to you and how's that fair to everybody else? We can't plan if we don't know exactly what it is that you're supposed to be doing, and labels matter. I'll also say this, Governor Tom Ridge, former Governor Tom Ridge, is one of my co-chairs, former governor of Pennsylvania, and he talks a lot about federalism and how we have things set up here in the United States. And I would suggest, while we're talking about laboratory systems, across the nation, I think we need to think also about what happens at the state level. A lot of what we're talking about can and should be mirrored at that level within each state. We don't take a lot of time to talk about that, and we're not going to during these 2 days, but it's something I think we need to consider. Frankly, we saw it during COVID. At a certain point, the governors just said, okay, we're not getting what we need, we can't get what we need, so we're going to do whatever. We're going to purchase, we're going to establish. I'd rather see that be done in a way that's not quite so helter-skelter and is better supported than what happened back then. And I think we can do that, but it requires some additional engagement. For our last panel, Andrew, thank you for facilitating that. We talked about factors that influence performance, and we have a giant list: ability to operationalize, ability to ramp up, ability to deal with chaos, ability to adapt, ability to reframe, ability to actually get paperwork done in advance, which is amazing, ability to get your qualifications done in advance if you can, and so forth. I don't need to lecture everybody, you guys just heard it, but I will say that I think it's really interesting that, Beth, I think it was you who mentioned outdated legislation that's been on the books since the 70s. You mentioned a particular state. I would suggest to you, being former congressional staff, that there's plenty of outdated legislation in U.S. statute, U.S. code, that we need to go through and do something about. Especially for the things that held us back during COVID. We should not be a nation that's operating on the basis of exception. We've got some time now. There are congressional staff, and at the congressional level, but also at the state level, there are people whose job it is to work on this. And I know they're busy. I used to be a congressional staffer, but now is the time. We've got bills coming up where we could square some of this stuff away. So let's square it away. There are things we can do now that we don't need to wait for an emergency supplemental to do, before the next thing happens. I would say just two other things. One is that this notion of people leaving for the private sector, we talked about it earlier in the day, that it's hard to compete. And people need to make a living, and people are exhausted, and they'd like to go somewhere else where they can at least make some more money. But then we have a tendency in the government to act as if they've died, and we no longer have access to them. Andy, I get it. I understand what you were saying. From a contracting perspective, we have to be careful about how we are perceived, and we have to be careful in terms of our rules and regulations. However, I think we've all seen that in the midst of an emergency, suddenly we're able to jump over all of those hoops, and the contracting officers and the COTARs and everybody sort of back up and say, oh, it's an emergency. So we have to change some of the mindset there. And Beth, as you said, we have to get over it. How we get over it is probably not on the basis of rules that are put in place during steady state when nothing else is going on. And then lastly, I would just say this. I think it's time for us to reframe some things. To Today we heard the term public health surveillance, and people are tired of the word surveillance, and the public doesn't even know what surveillance actually means anyway. And we talk about the private sector. What are they doing in public health surveillance? Public health is somehow some governmental thing and not a private sector thing. But if you reframe that as business intelligence, suddenly, everybody's all in. And who has the data? Data is power. Who's got it? If you have it, who cares what side you're on? I think we have to reframe it, because suddenly when you do, people are in. Suddenly they're at the table and they want to be there. They see something. It's not so much about incentive as much as it is reframing and getting rid of some old language that just doesn't mean anything anymore. I think in terms of our workforce issue, there was a lot that was said today that talks about the value of our workforce, and also talked about how we're losing a lot of people to exhaustion and to just sort of a hopeless attitude about what's there in the future, even if you put money aside. People are getting told that there are doors that are closed to them. We're not putting public health people in charge of things. We're putting people from other professions in charge of those things. And there are ripple effects from that. If we want people to stay in the fields that we talked about today, or we want to attract them, then we have to make those things attractive. And it's not just about how much time something has taken. A lot of people join the military knowing full well that they're going to have to go deploy to a military zone and be there working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for at least 6 months, if not for years on end, and then have some additional rotations. Why do they do that? And our attitude is somehow different. I think we have to bring back the notion that what we're doing is really, really important. It is important for the nation. It is important for our localities. It's important for the world. And we just have to do it. We have to change our language. I think that for our nation's laboratorians, they have to be appreciated for all the work that they have done, wherever it is they are, and they have to be supported. So I'm hoping that with what we learned today and what we discuss tomorrow, we will be able to do that for them in some small or large way. So with that, Academy staff, is there anything else we need to discuss?
No, I don't think so. Unless Craig or Suzette want to make any comments?
Craig or Suzette? Suzette? No?
Craig's itching, I can tell.
Craig always has something.
I've never met a Mike I don't like. You know that. Listen, I mean, in listening today, and Asha, I love your charge to service. Obviously, I spent my career in service. But the discussion today, it seems to me, is pretty straightforward. Can we define our roles? Can we define our responsibilities? Can we create a playbook that defines how we're going to act together when we get challenged? What are the supports that are needed to make it functional, that is, supplies and people? And I would say, private sector, why don't you form an ad hoc governance body and invite the feds to the table, as opposed to asking them to invite you to the table? You could find a foundation that could put the money into that, set it up for a 6 to 12 month run to get to a plan, get to a playbook, get to some exercises, and then disband it. Or set up something to make it an ongoing piece. But reverse the tables. It goes to reframing. Don't wait for the feds to come to you. Go to them. And this is from somebody who spent 30 years in uniform. So, anyway, it's been exciting. It's been interesting because it's doable. This is doable. You just need the will and the willingness to play together. And you can do it. This is a smart crowd. You know how to do this. That's all. Thanks.
Okay. Well, then with that, I'll see everybody tomorrow morning at 0900. Thank you.